So I'm going to go on ahead and start recording this session. I'll take a pause when we do breakout sessions, so that information won't be recorded. But the main information that we're sharing today will be recorded. Okay, so welcome to Untraining Your Staff. Let me give you just a quick tidbit of information about the Staff Training Roundtable. I'm Tracy Letmate. I am the chair that's listed down here on the list of officers currently for Staff Training Roundtable. So we are a community of practice within OLA dedicated to helping members with all things staff training related. So this is really about if you are involved with training staff in any capacity, this is the place for you to come. Our membership is free to OLA members. So if you know folks who are doing training and they're not a part of our group, have them join up, or if you're not a member, just go into OLA if you're a member of OLA and sign up there. We provide various content sessions throughout the year. Our hope is to always at the annual conference have a session. Of course, that didn't happen this year. So we're trying to make up for it with some of these content sessions that are available this summer. But our content sessions are about sharing ideas about staff training and just providing opportunities for everybody to connect with other library staff around the state. So our roundtable is currently recruiting for officer positions. The current officers are myself as the chair, Roberta Richards, who's our co-chair with Portland Community College, and Darcy Hanning is our secretary at the State Library of Oregon. Darcy sent out an email a week or two ago recruiting, asking for recruitments for the positions. So if you're interested or know somebody who may be interested in leadership, feel free to reach out to Darcy and let her know. I think the July 8th is the cutoff for those positions. So this first session today is about untraining your staff. We know that we have a lot of changes coming up in our library systems, and it's really important that we have a way to help our staff adapt to these changes. And that means sometimes we have to do some unlearning. We have to unteach people some of the skills and behaviors that we have probably spent so much time teaching them in the first place. So we're going to have a few examples to share with you. I'll have one to share. Amy Honeset, who's with Multnomah County Library as well, has an example. And then I have a recording from Blake Kincaid with Fort Vancouver, where he's talking about untraining his staff. So we'll share that, and then we'll do some breakout sessions for you all to have an opportunity to chat with each other about the work that you're doing in your libraries and how you might come up with some ideas to untrain your staff. I'm going to do a quick check just to make sure I don't have any chats happening here. Nope, looks like everybody's doing okay with hearing me, which is great. Okay, so let's talk about what it means for learning the first time around. So when we first learn something, we're given new knowledge, and that's usually followed by some kind of practical application of that knowledge and then reinforcement over time. We don't typically just learn something and then go, well, I learned it and I don't need to do anything with that now, because when we don't do it for a while, we forget. So some examples of learning the first time include riding a bike. I love this picture. It reminded me of kind of the era in which I was first learning to ride a bike. Learning to use new software, that's something that happens pretty frequently in the workplace. And customer service principles, just how do you work with customers? How do you work with your patrons? So those are some examples of learning the first time. Once we learn something, what we have to do is practice, 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 practice. We have to keep practicing this new skill over time, and this is what helps learning stick. The more we practice, the more we develop habits, and it just becomes second nature for us. So let's think back on something that you first learned how to do. Think about a skill that you've learned and that maybe you're using on a regular basis now. So in the chat box, tell us about that skill and think about how long it took you until performing that skill became easy and routine. So as I mentioned earlier, I have a couple of kids, and I've been walking around the neighborhood lately noticing other parents in the same situation where they're teaching their kids to learn how to ride a bike. And I can tell you, I don't remember it as much from when I was a kid, but watching all of the other parents and going through this myself, I realized, you know, the whole process of practicing that skill of getting up on the bike is one thing. But then, you know, if the kid has a fall and hurts themselves in some way, that can be a little disheartening, right? So when you're learning something new, if you make mistakes or you don't get it right the first time, that can be really discouraging, and people have a tendency to say, well, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. It's too hard. And we have to figure out ways to encourage people to do that. So it takes practice. And, you know, I have one kiddo who he fell on his bike and he said, yep, I'm kind of done with this. And then he didn't ride his bike for the rest of the summer. And then he was watching all the other kids ride their bikes and said, oh, wow, they're having fun and they're able to do this. I should be able to do this. So, you know, the next summer came around and he got back on the bike and he practiced and practiced and till he finally was able to do it really well. And I think that there's a lot that we see that happens in the adult world too, when it comes to learning new skills and behaviors that mimic that. So in the group chat, think about things that you might include. So great. So Lee's talking about learning to knit. That's something I'm always amazed with, knitting and sewing and things like that. It's a skill that takes time, but gosh, I watch people, Lee, I've watched you in meetings knitting, and I'm just amazed at, you know, the ability to just do that secondhand and not even think about it while you're listening and having conversations with other people. And I know that that is something that takes time to learn. So Robin talks about sewing. Watching people sew is always amazing to me as well. Something that I've not had any practice with. What else? What are some other skills? Oh, practicing doing something with a different hand. That's great. Crocheting right-handed versus being left-handed. Any other thoughts? Amy talks about typing. That's another fun one I think about too when I watch my kids type. They are masters at the single finger typing, and I keep laughing about the idea that when I was in school, I had an entire semester in high school of just typing on a typewriter. And I tell them that and they're like, Mom, what's a typewriter? But that's fun. And Lee talks about a new catalog software that we had to learn. And yes, I'm actually going to be talking about that in a little bit, Lee. She says, I don't feel that it's easy and I'm way out of practice. And that's the other thing too, since we've been closed, a lot of our libraries have been closed, there may be skills and behaviors that you want people to remember, and it may require relearning as well. So we'll talk about that. Okay, so good ideas, good examples. Thank you for sharing those. Okay, so what is untraining? So untraining is the process of unlearning and relearning. But when we talk about training, we're talking about this happening at the direction of somebody else. So we unlearn and relearn all the time, but most of the time we are driven to that process based on our own desires. So I think about things like new technology that comes into your households. So anytime I get a new phone, I'll use my iPhone here as an example. Every time I get a new phone, I'm like, oh gosh, I have to relearn how things work on this particular one. Fortunately, the iPhones are pretty similar, but you know, being able to relearn which button does what and how to access different features. But those are things that we're really driven to learn how to do because they're going to make our lives easier, hopefully. When we talk about untraining, though, we're really talking about skills and behaviors that people may have no desire to unlearn and relearn something new. So when we unlearn something, we actually need to change our thoughts and assumptions about that known behavior. And that means we're going through something called change, and change is hard. So I love this cartoon because everybody wants change, but when we talk about who actually wants to go through that process of change, we usually hear crickets because it can be really hard. And change management is probably something that many of you have been hearing a lot about lately. Especially in terms of everything that's going to be changing in our library systems as we're moving forward. So I'm going to give you an example of something that I've had to sort of unlearn and relearn, but it wasn't necessarily at my direction. I took social cues, I'll put it that way. So when I kind of first came into the business world, I came from a part of the country that said y'all a lot, and I quickly said, I'm not saying y'all. So I switched it to guys because that was what we used kind of in the East Coast and the Southern area where I was kind of going through my early business days. So I often said, so what do you guys think in classes when I was teaching? And then people started saying things, oh, guys, that's pretty, you know, sexist. We're all females in this room. Why are you saying guys? But it was such a habit for me. It was really hard to get out of that habit. So I said, you know what, I'm going to change this. I'm going to do it differently. So instead of saying, what do you guys think? I had to say, what else can I say? What do you all think? So what do folks think about that? I use folks a lot now. But I get it wrong. I'll be in class and I'll say, so what do you guys think? And I go, oh, I said it. I did it again. Darn it, I forgot. And then I realize it's okay. It's part of the learning process. It's part of unlearning and relearning something new. And we're going to make mistakes as we go through that. It's just a part of life. It's part of how we learn. So I often stop and I'll correct myself in front of the group. Oops, gosh, you know what? I got that wrong. Here's what I meant to say. What do you all think? And it's a nice way to admit and show to everybody that we're all in this together. We're all learning and relearning, and it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to be humble about it. Okay, so let's think a little bit now, switch a little bit about what's changing. What are some of the skills in your libraries that your staff will have to change in our new library world? So think about some of the new skills that people are going to have to learn as they're coming back into our libraries. And put your thoughts in the chat. What are some of the things folks will have to relearn? Crickets. Here we go. Social distancing in a high-touch patron environment. Absolutely. We definitely are in a state where we've already seen this happening in our libraries. Not so much working with patrons, but just working with each other, working with our peers, where somebody will say, gosh, you know what, I'm having a hard time figuring this out. Can you come take a look at this and let me know? And it's second nature just to walk up behind that person and go and look over their shoulder and see what's going on. And now we have to rethink all of those behaviors and how they work. So I see here we're talking about new types of customer service, cleaning practices. We are going to have entirely new ways of keeping our libraries clean and safe, and that's going to take practice as well. Expressing active listening without the benefit of full facial expressions. We may have to teach people how to talk differently because their mouths are going to be covered up and we're not going to be able to see when they're smiling or if they're frowning. Maybe the eyebrows might give it away, but I think that not being able to see faces may make a difference. Yeah, we have to help people from computers at a distance. We used to share a lot of stuff like books, DVDs, desks, computers. We're not going to be able to do quite as much of that sharing of materials like we used to be able to. So yeah, there's a lot of things like that. What else do we have here? Yeah, we have to use our words more than before to walk people through stuff rather than doing it for them. Absolutely. So that would be a really fun one to teach people. How do you talk somebody through how to do something instead of leaning over their shoulder and kind of taking control with the mouse, or you know, things like that that we might have done in the past. Those are all great examples. All right. So I warned you, I have a dog who's now whining, saying, get me out of here. All right, hold on one second here. All right. So what do adults need to unlearn something? So it's not really different than learning in the first place. It's kind of the same types of repetition and practice, but the problem is we're unlearning something and then relearning something else. That process takes longer and there are a lot more emotions involved. You're walking in, instead of people saying, oh yay, here's something new that I have to learn, they're walking in and saying, but I really liked how we did things before. Why do we have to change it now? So you're already coming up against a type of resistance, an emotional resistance. And again, thinking back to the ideas of change management, how do we help people overcome that resistance and let them know that this is something good? So here are some tips on how we might do that. So first of all, think about the who, what, where, why, when, and how questions. Provide information for people. Why are the prior learned skills no longer needed? So really explaining to people why, I think that is one of the most important things we can do. What's taking its place? So if I'm not doing this other thing anymore, what am I doing? People want that information. How will I learn? What will be the process? How are you going to support me? So just think through the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions and figure out how would I answer these questions for the people who are having to unlearn and relearn something. And then think about, what do adults need in terms of support? So a lot of times, once, just like riding a bike or any of those other skills that we were talking about, you know, it takes practice, but then, you know, having somebody on your side to say, hey, you know what, you're doing a great job. Oh, you fell down that time, but it's okay. Just keep practicing. Having that support system in place is really important. So think about, when you're supporting the learner, how are you going to reinforce those new skills that they're learning? How are you going to provide opportunities for them to discuss and reflect on the learning process or the unlearning process? How are you going to listen to them and maybe make small little changes as you're going through as well? All right, so I'm going to share a quick example of learning from the front lines with Multnomah County. So as Lee mentioned earlier, we recently implemented a new ILS at our library. So for those of you who, everybody works at a library, so everybody uses an ILS, but we went from Sierra to Symphony, and those are night and day, very, very different software systems. So our strategies for unlearning and untraining included, first of all, we spent a lot of time at the very beginning of our project explaining why the change was necessary to get folks on board, so that everybody understood why we were moving from Sierra to Symphony. What was the reason for the change? Boy, was there a lot of emotional resistance to this particular change. So we spent some time up front really trying to help people understand what the change was about. And then we used some activities to slowly introduce the new software. So a few months before we ever even planned to implement the new software, we started giving people little glimpses of, here's what it looks like. Here's how to do little things. We did little videos that showed how to do things, and we incorporated new terminology because the words that were used in the software were different. So just providing them with some of the basics at the very beginning, you know, hey, we used to call it this, And now we call it this. So just kind of helping that new, helping people understand the new terminology, and then giving them some simple tasks to practice. We wanted to give them tasks that they were used to regularly performing. So just how to log in, how to look up a patron, little things like that. Not giving them the whole shebang at once, but just giving them little pieces that they could get in there and practice with. And then after we did all of that, we brought them into the classroom, we put them through training, we gave them worksheets, we gave them activities that they could do outside of the classroom. So we did a lot of that supported learning process. And then after we implemented the new session or the new software, we did lots of practice sessions, and we provided one-on-one support. So we continued to ask questions, what's working, what's not working, and listened to what people needed, and then continued to look for ways to provide more direct support for people to continue to learn the new software. So that's my example. I'm going to turn, and then the other thing, sorry, I thought I had covered everything. The last thing we did were quizzes and contests. So as we were getting people to learn things, for example, one of the things was we recognized people were so used to using the Sierra catalog to look information up, they weren't using Bibliocommons as often. And so we did a lot of contests and quizzes for people to learn how to use Bibliocommons a little bit better, so that they could support patrons, since some of the catalog features that were available in Sierra were no longer there. So just reinforcing through that support and through quizzes and contests, and just engaging, getting people engaged in different ways so that they can continue that learning process. An open communication channel to hear what's going right and not right, and I mentioned that earlier. All right, so I'm going to turn this over to Amy Honesett. She will talk a little bit about learning from the front lines in a different area with Multnomah County Library. So Amy, do you want to go on ahead?
Sure, thanks Tracy. So Multnomah County Library's customer service training is based on some customer service principles that were developed at like a pretty long time ago, like 10, 12 years ago. And also, I bet a lot of you can relate that that many of us are kind of used to the idea that great customer service means, great in-person customer service means meeting somebody's eye, smiling, approaching them, and just like being really, really direct. But now we know that that can be really intimidating to some patrons. It can be culturally inappropriate. It doesn't acknowledge neurodiversity, and it's not the way everybody wants to be approached, right? So in our customer service training, we wanted to acknowledge that. So during our customer service training at this point, we kind of begin by asking staff to reflect upon a good customer service experience that they've had. So we're making it kind of relevant to their experience. Then we talk about what good customer service means to them. And we talk about the similarities and the differences. So we're setting the stage for thinking about why we might be training them to do something that doesn't come naturally to them. Pardon me. Then we define the library's approach to customer service. So we're being reflective of our patrons' needs. We're paying attention to their affect when they're coming into the building. And again, of course, I'm just talking about in-person customer service training, but we're paying attention to their affect and we're reflecting that back, but we're staying authentic. We define our approach to customer service, and then we acknowledge that one of our service principles, that making eye contact and smiling, may not be appropriate for every patron. So we talk about the reason for that service principle. We want to make the library really welcoming, and then we talk about the reason for this change as well. The trainer then would explain how to use reflective body language in an authentic way. So it's not just theoretical, it's kind of it's detailed. And then we would have a chance to practice using that reflective body language and kind of a physical activity in which the group breaks up into two parts. Some people are assigned to try to look everybody right in the eye, and some people are assigned to kind of be more closed off and look away. So again, participants are getting that chance to actually practice what it feels like to try to meet somebody's eye and not to get that that connection, but also to feel what it's like from the patron's point of view when somebody's like trying to meet your eye and you're trying to look away. So it may build a little bit of empathy, and again, reinforce why we're doing this, why we're attempting to change the way that we provide customer service in a way that may not be comfortable or natural to all of us. After that, we'd have a discussion about how that can better serve our patrons, how it can make the library a more welcoming place, and again, reinforcing how we can do that in an authentic way without losing our personality or our individualized sense of customer service. And then I believe that this is brought up again and again in other trainings as well. So during our cross-cultural communication class, we have another activity, a similar activity, and a lot of discussion about being culturally responsive and using reflective body language. In our question answering class, we do a similar activity. So this is reinforced down the line, hopefully. And that is how we are hoping to support staff in giving great customer service, regardless of the patrons' needs.
Perfect. Thanks, Amy. Okay, now we are going to move over to the next person, which is Blake. I don't know if Blake just joined us. I know he was planning to come a little late. He did just join. Hey, Blake, we're now on your section. So learning from the front lines from Fort Vancouver. So we have Fort Vancouver, Blake Kincaid, our Vancouver engagement manager, talking about new curbside hold services, which was a recent challenge in Unlearning as well. So here's the video that Blake is sharing with us. Whoops.
If you press time, I could try and channel it live.
Okay, it's being really wonky here.
Yeah, it's a YouTube video, so maybe since I made it in time, do you want me to try and do it? I could probably do it in less than 10 minutes.
Do you just want to talk?
Yeah, that might be easiest.
Okay.
I don't know if people can see me or anything, but basically what we did at Fort Vancouver Regional Libraries is we just opened up our curbside service just in the past couple of weeks. We only advertised at the beginning of this week. We did kind of a soft launch. And we had the challenge of training our staff in a very short period of time for our new service. And the one thing that was a real challenge that wasn't just a procedure was getting our staff to prioritize safety over customer service. And I think based on the previous slides, I think Tracy already shared what are the challenges that Multnomah County and some other places have had. We've been training our customer service philosophy for so long. Ours we called Start With Yes. And I think a lot of places have a similar thing that involves finding a solution no matter what, that there's always a solution to every problem. And if you explore it in partnership with the patron, you can always come to a solution that satisfies what they actually want. So you have your reference interview, but on top of that, you make everything positive and work towards solving their solution. And what we found is with our curbside service, our safety protocols that we have to follow are very, very, very limiting. They limit us in so many ways in what we can actually do compared to what our patrons expect. So the amount of obstacles, the number of times where we're going to have to basically start with no, in effect, has really, as we started implementing the training, we realized, wow, this is very, very different. And our staff were confused because all these years we've been training them on this different approach. So in order to walk people through this, we had to figure out both branch by branch, but also at the district level, because this is a district-wide effort, we had to figure out what is the best approach. So our problem with the unlearning and the untraining was that we also wanted them to not completely unlearn the lessons of the past, and we wanted to keep some of it, like the positive interactions and the proactive problem solving and some of the other things we've been training people on all those years. And we also want to make sure that when we go back to full service, which I think all of us are planning to eventually do, we all assume that this is a temporary situation, even if it goes on for months. It can't go on forever, or well, we hope it won't go on forever. And when we do in-person service again, we want our staff to continue to start with yes and prioritize problem solving and solving people's actual problems, identifying them and then giving them solutions. So what we did in our training was we gave them some scenarios, and then we asked them to problem solve in small groups, and then we presented them with kind of a canned set of answers that the committee came up with. And then we had short conversations comparing, uh-oh, am I going to talk?
Hello.
That was me. So anyways, this is one of our scenarios. We call this one Chatty Cathy. If you've worked in public libraries, this is an extremely familiar one. If you worked in academic libraries, because I did for a year a long time ago, we had plenty of students who were, or employees even, of other departments who were quite chatty and would monopolize your time. So this is not unique to public libraries. But in the context of our new curbside service, this was provided our staff with a new challenge. So a person just really wants to jabber at you, but also because they're excited to see you, they may not, in the moment, be willing to follow our safety rules of staying in the car, staying 6 feet apart, not expecting us to touch their return materials, things like that. Having the trunk open when we get out there to minimize any kind of interaction. So our staff, what we asked them to do was to, and before we go through this scenario, we asked our staff to continue to think of the problem solving, but to remember that even in the previous pre-COVID-19 world, we always had non-negotiable limitations that were outside of our control. And so we tried to bring our staff into this new world with so many new limitations by reminding them that these limitations may seem new and unprecedented, but they actually fit into that old way of thinking in the sense that there were always non-negotiables. So if somebody took a book and ripped it in half right in front of you, you couldn't then tell them that they didn't have to pay to replace it. I mean, there were certain things that were non-negotiable. But we reminded people that they always were expected to do it in a professional and friendly manner and to give people options. So with the return books, for example, they have the option of returning the books themselves. So it's not like we're telling them that we're not going to accept their return materials. We, the staff members, just can't touch them. We need the patrons to take them over to the outside book drops and put the books into the book drops themselves. So that's an example of trying to get our staff to both unlearn the priority levels between things, that the new COVID-19 safety rules provided by the state and the health department are non-negotiable. They're not up to us. We cannot choose to ignore them as staff members. So that is now the top priority, but we're still able to talk through a challenge or a situation and problem solve with the patron. So, and then here's the scenario. Chatty Cathy is a longtime patron with a reputation for not respecting staff time. Prior to closure, she likes to tell your team all about her genealogy, grandchildren, health ailments. I always like to think of a patron who told me about a giant oozing sore that she had on her arm and how she wanted me to help her diagnose it. And she showed it to me too. So that is my own personal Chatty Cathy from a long time ago. So when you approach your vehicle, Kathy is excited to see you. She can't contain herself. She steps out of her vehicle in tears. You politely remind her to stay inside her vehicle. She gets back in her car, closes the door, rolls down her window, and continues to jabber at you. What do you say to Kathy? And so we had our staff then brainstorm. And then after they brainstormed, we provided them with a kind of guided response. Now, we told them these were not the only proper responses. So the committee said, it's wonderful to see you. I can't wait till the branches are open. We have more time to stay and chat, but I have a lot of work to do in this new situation. Take care. I don't really have time for a long conversation. I'm so glad to see you. I'm glad you're doing well, keeping the personal contact, not losing the goodwill that we have with the public. Thanks for telling me about this. I have to go. There's a little more direct approach. I'm expected back inside so I can help the next person, which in our case is true. We have limited time slots. That's the way we're doing curbside. So we have to get back in the building so we can catch the next phone call. And down at the bottom, it reemphasizes the fact that we need these to be friendly conversations. Once again, keeping what was the best and what can still work from what we used to train people to do, while walking people through how they can use that way of thinking while prioritizing a completely new set of priorities that are seemingly incompatible. And I added a whole nother one, but I don't know if we have time for it. But I wanted to make sure that we had source material in case we needed it for later. And this is the escalated angry patron one, which is, I think you will all agree, something worth talking through, because even in an academic library, even in an archive, you're all by yourself. The random visitor comes in and they decide to flip a table. That's always the thing you'll be talking about for the next year, I would imagine. And thank you, Tracy. I think I kept it to about less than 10 minutes. I don't know, I wasn't timing myself.
You did great. Thanks, Blake. It was actually better to have you in person than video because you could talk through the scenario, so that's perfect. And I will share the slide deck with everyone afterwards so you can go through and look at this information in more detail on your own. All right, so it's time for breakout sessions. Here's the way this is going to work. So in your groups, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen in a minute and I'll put you into a couple of groups. There's not a ton of people, there's 10 people here, so I'll probably put you in groups of 5. So this time in your breakout session is to be spent brainstorming how to untrain your staff with specific challenges that are coming up for you all. So each person who has a challenge should share, and the group should participate in the conversation. I gave the group initially 30 minutes. We probably have closer to 20 minutes, I think, to get through the individual breakout sessions. So be sure you make sure to allow enough time for everybody to share. So here's what I'm asking you to share. Share what you know will be changing. And what challenges do you anticipate staff will have with this change? You just heard 3 different examples of challenges that we've had implementing this idea of untraining our staff on things. So talk about what challenges you think your staff will have with the change that's coming up. And then as a group, brainstorm ideas to support overcoming these challenges. What are some different ways that you think ideas could be put in place to help overcome those challenges? And then how would you reinforce and support learning after the change? What are some of the activities that you could do to support that continuous learning process? So let me go on ahead and stop sharing. That puts us back in our groups, and then we'll do breakout rooms. I'll do 2 rooms. It'll automatically, so I'm going to create the rooms, and then I'm going to give you all about 20 minutes. I'll probably jump in back and forth between the 2 rooms just to see how things are going. And then when we have a minute left, I will end the breakout sessions, and then you should see a timer that pops up that says you have a countdown of this is how much time you have left to finish up your conversations before we come back together. Any questions on what I'm asking you all to do before we go in, feel free to put them in chat or speak up. Either way is fine. Okay, I will take silence as acceptance and we will move into the rooms. Hi, it's good to see everybody coming back. We'll wait on the other group to join us and then we'll finish up. I have to figure out how to reshare my screen again. Okay, so some final thoughts on, let me make sure everybody's back. Looks like everybody's back. All right, some final thoughts on our session today. Quick recap, were there any ideas that were shared in your discussion that you're excited to take back and use? Or were there reinforcement or support ideas that you discussed that might be helpful? You can either speak up or use the chat to share. So Robin mentions identifying core services, really focusing on the what we can do, which is a really nice strategy to help people think about, instead of thinking about all the things you can't do. And Lee mentions that remembering the why is really helpful because then it segues into a why of why we're trying to keep you safe. So really focusing, I think that part of the conversation we had on our group was focusing on safety first, was really a helpful way to frame what we were able to do. And Blake says safety rules is a way of caring for our patrons rather than just being a limitation. Good. Anything came from the Any of the other conversation? Okay.
I'd just like to share from our group.
Yeah.
Most of the examples in our group all came back around to the new challenge of helping underserved communities. And with all the safety limitations, underserved communities are actually the hardest to help now. And they were really difficult to reach before. But now we know that they need our services even more than they did before during this challenging time. So that, I don't have a solution. It's just, that's what our examples really all kind of came from or boiled down to.
And I know that another example that was shared in ours, our library system is going through this, and it sounds like what was shared from with Alice was, yeah, from Alice shared that just changing locations. So there's a couple of library systems that are actually moving in the middle of all of this happening. And so that presents a whole nother set of challenges with how we communicate with our patrons to let them know about the new location, new services, as well as how do we accommodate what a typical operational activity might look like is going to look very different with COVID-19. So yeah, I mean, it can be all kinds of different ways to think about. All right, so let me just end the session today with a reminder that we have another content session sponsored by the Staff Training Roundtable about moving your training to the virtual world. So I know a few of you are signed up for our second session on Tuesday, July 21st. Same kind of format. We'll have information sharing and a couple of examples from different library systems. And then we'll move into a real concrete breakout session focused on how we move training to the virtual world, because we are constantly being challenged by this right now, as we can't all come together in the classroom in the same way that we used to. So thank you on behalf of the Staff Training Roundtable. I appreciate everybody coming today. It was nice to get to see you all, and hopefully you all have an opportunity to join us more in the future. And if you're not a member of the Staff Training Roundtable, join. It's free, and we'd be excited to have you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.